Hi, my name is Joanna Whitney. I am an intuitive artist and a student of natural law, and I'm in the process of going through the book Formal Consensus for decision making by a group because I feel it is a vehicle for natural law and freedom for freedom groups trying to create a parallel economy and system. And I'm on page 6, and I'm going to actually try to get through this whole end of the chapter tonight, and then I'll probably go back and reiterate some of this later. So the bottom of the page, it says formal consensus is the most democratic decision-making process. So I would prefer to say, because of the word democratic has been misused and is a seems to be a precursor to socialism, I'm going to say that formal consensus is the most egalitarian decision-making process, meaning that it is the most equal decision-making process for supporting individual freedom and for getting a group decision that is not a dictatorship decision. Groups which desire to involve as many people as possible need to use an inclusive process. To attract and involve large numbers, it is important that the process encourages participation, allows equal access to power, develops cooperation, promotes empowerment, and creates a sense of individual responsibility for the group's actions. The process itself does that. All of these are cornerstones of formal consensus. The goal of consensus is not the selection of several options, but the development of one decision which is the best for the whole group. It is synthesis and evolution, not competition and attrition. Formal consensus is based on the principles of the group. Although every individual must consent to a decision before it is adopted, if there are any objections, it is not the choice of the individual alone to determine if an objection prevents the proposal from being adopted. Every objection or concern must first be presented before the group and either resolved or validated. A valid objection is one in keeping with all previous decisions of the group and based upon the commonly held principles or foundation adopted by the group. The objection must not only address the concerns of the individual, but it must also be in the best interest of the group as a whole. If the objection is not based upon the foundation or is in contradiction with the prior decision, it is not valid for the group and therefore out of order. So what this kind of shows is that groups who use this process, who are trained in this process, take this process seriously and don't just throw up objections for the sake of getting attention or just trying to throw the group off track. They actually have to really research their objections so they can prove that it's in the best interest of the group not to move forward on whatever the decision is. And they also have to prove that the decision violates the principles that the group has set down. And we went over those principles. Like we went over something like 6 to 12 principles in chapter 3 that were suggested as principles for a group to decide upon or to have in place before trying to use this formal consensus. And those are principles like respect, trust, nonviolence, self-empowerment, and conflict resolution. And there was a few others as well. So people really take the process seriously and they do research before they object, they research before they bring anything forward, and they take individual responsibility as being one among many, one member, one equal member among many equal members. So everyone is a leader in the group. And so everyone takes it seriously and doesn't just throw things together. Okay. Formal consensus is desirable in larger groups. I think I read this already, but I'm just going to say this. If the structure is vague, decisions can be difficult to achieve. Actually, I didn't read this yet. They will become increasingly more difficult in larger groups. Formal consensus is designed for large groups. It is a highly structured model. It has guidelines and formats for managing meetings, facilitating discussions, resolving conflict, and reaching decisions. Smaller groups may need less structure, so they may choose from many techniques and roles suggested in this book. So, I mean, I've had experience like if the structure is vague, decisions can be difficult to achieve. We just had this on December 10th when we met for what became the producers network for the barter market. And, we were fortunate that we all pretty much agreed with each other that we wanted to have a market. We want to have a parallel economy. So basically, we were sort of guided into making those decisions by a small group of people. And we just threw the decisions together. And it worked out that time. And that's fabulous that it worked out that time. But that doesn't mean it's always going to work out so easily. The structure is vague. If the structure is vague, decisions can be difficult to achieve unless, we're relying on one person, which is kind of what we did do. The person who organized that meeting basically guided us into the decision, and it happened to be the decision that we all wanted, but it's not always going to be like that. So, formal consensus works better when more people participate. Consensus is more than the sum total of ideas of the individuals in the group. That basically means that there's a spiritual component to where the decision comes from. During discussion, ideas build one upon the next, generating new ideas until the best decision emerges. This dynamic is called the creative interplay of ideas. Creativity plays a major part as everyone strives to discover what is best for the group. The more people involved in this cooperative process, the more ideas and possibilities are generated. Consensus works best with everyone participating. This assumes, of course, that everyone in the group is trained in formal consensus and is actively using it. This book shows you how to do it, and someday I'm hoping a group of people are going to emerge that want to learn how to do it together. And it could be like members of all the different groups, and then those people could bring it back to their groups. Or it could be one group. It could be a group that's doing the barter currency. Maybe we'll decide to use it, and then we'll learn how to use it. And hopefully, once we learn how to use it, we can teach other people how to use it. Formal consensus is not inherently time-consuming. I think this is the big fear everyone has about it. Everybody's worried that it's going to take a really long time. Decisions are not an end in themselves. Decision-making is a process which starts with an idea and ends with the actual implementation of the decision. While it may be true in an autocratic process that decisions can be made quickly, the actual implementation will take time. When one person or a small group of people makes a decision for a larger group, the decisions not only has to be communicated to the others, but it also has to be acceptable to them, or its implementation will need to be forced upon them. This will certainly take time, perhaps a considerable amount of time. On the other hand, if everyone participates in the decision-making, the decision does not need to be communicated, and its implementation does not need to be forced upon the participants. The decision may take longer to make, but once it is made, implementation can happen in a timely manner. The amount of time a decision takes to make from start to finish is not a factor of the process used. Rather, it is a factor of the complexity of the proposal itself. An easy decision takes less time than a difficult, complex decision, regardless of the process used or the number of people involved. Of course, formal consensus works better if one practices patience, but any process is improved with a generous amount of patience. Decision-making is a process which starts with an idea and ends with the actual implementation of the decision. When one person or a small group of people makes the decision for a larger group, the decision not only has to be communicated to the others, but it also has to be acceptable to them, or its implementation will need to be forced upon them. Now, as long as the ends justify the means, then we can get away with this stuff, but it's not going to work forever, even though we may feel like we're in such a panic that we have to implement all of these fixes for our problems right now. But the whole thing that got us into this situation that we're in is by a small group of people forcing implementation of decisions that we didn't make upon us. And so I just underscore that we have to learn how to do this at some point, because the ends does not justify the means. In a way, how that works out is like, I have faith that that everything is going to be taken care of, especially if I make sure that how I relate to other people does not cause harm, that I work hard at learning how to assist other people in being heard in a group. As long as I do all of these things, I'm going to be taken care of, and I'm not going to be in a situation where I'm in a FEMA camp with a bunch of other hippies like me. I don't believe it will happen. I don't believe, because I believe that the reason we're here on Earth is to learn how to relate to one another and treat each other the way we would like to be treated, and treat each other as if each one of us has the spirit within each other and within ourselves, and that we do have to learn how to do this together. It's not just about surviving on our own at all. Here's the part I wanted to get to of this chapter. Formal consensus cannot be secretly disrupted. This may not be an issue for some groups, but many people know that the state actively surveils, infiltrates, and disrupts nonviolent domestic, political, and religious groups. To counteract anti-democratic, anti-egalitarian tactics by the state, I added that, a group would need to develop and encourage a decision-making process which could not be covertly controlled or manipulated. Formal consensus, if practiced as described in this book, is such a process. Since the assumption is one of cooperation and goodwill, it is always appropriate to ask for an explanation of how and why someone's actions are in the best interest of the group. Disruptive behavior must not be tolerated. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. While it is true, this process cannot prevent openly disruptive behavior, the point is to prevent covert disruption, hidden agenda, and malicious manipulation of the process. Any group for which infiltration is a threat ought to consider the process outlined in this book if it wishes to remain open, egalitarian, and productive. Okay, so I think that might be attractive to many people because, we are being surveilled, and there are moles and there are infiltrators in our groups. And there are people in our groups that have narcissistic tendencies and are disruptive. I've been in such groups where, I was supposed to be leading the group, and one person didn't have the patience to let me take the time I needed, and they just interrupted me and took over the meeting. That's just not tolerated, because in an informal consensus, there is a neutral facilitator. And if someone interrupts and is disruptive in some way, a violent, there's many ways to be disruptive, but interrupting or having private conversations or being violent towards other people, verbally, that person would be asked to stop doing that behavior. And then they would be asked to leave until they could come back and behave properly. It's just like treating a child in timeout. But there are also these moles, and like they said here, you can always ask what the purpose of the disruption is. And so those people can be tossed out, or it can be found out who they are, or they would just not be able to tolerate going through the whole process. Again, I mean, I was just in a group where a small collective of people made a group decision for the rest of the group, and I spoke up about it, and I was put down, but this is just typical of what we think we know. I mean, it's terrifying for most people to think that, because most people have an agenda about what they want to get accomplished, and they think that the group belongs to them. And you know what? I'm not anyone's property. I own myself. As a member of a group, I own myself, and I am not anyone's property. And so I expect to be able to participate equally with others in a group, which is what I told those people. And I don't think I'm going to be a part of that group anymore. But anyway, that's the end of this chapter. I just wanted to get through these things, and I can go back and look over it again, but I think I want to move on into the rest of the book, because it's going to describe everything. The next chapter is called On Decision Making, and it's going to get into how to do it, which I'm going to just read the whole thing, all 89 pages of it on these videos.